Hello, everyone. We have started officially. People are probably just signing in, so I'm going to filibuster because it's still legal here just for a few minutes. But we have a couple of announcements to make. You're stuck with this virtual format and my face with my kitchen wall behind me once again, just like last summer. So welcome to the 2021 spring kickoff. We have a great agenda, which you are familiar with already because you signed up and you're here. So welcome to this. I have a couple announcements to make real quick before I pass it off to Dr. Belinda Kemp, who will start us off. We had our first P45 board meeting in person in quite some time, a couple weeks ago, and we talked about a lot of things, of course, as we usually do. One thing that we really discussed at length was, when do we resume in-person meetings again, and how do we do so? Some people feel more comfortable with that than others. So we thought at this point, between all the people that have been vaccinated, and that combined with the fact that our first Friday meetings have always been held outside in the vineyard over the course of the summer, we thought that would be a fairly safe way to go about it. So we are going to try and resume some vineyard meetings for June, July, and August. If that sounds good to you and safe for you, welcome, and we'll stay tuned. If that sounds scary to you, then you can perhaps catch up with your friend who went or something, and we'll have other opportunities again later in the year. So that's what we're kicking around, some ideas to get back in person, which would be really great. Good to see all of each other's faces again. That would be wonderful. So if you haven't got your shot, think about it. I know a lot of the people that I contact and speak with in the industry, have been vaccinated and are clear. So we're kicking that idea around. Stay tuned. We're also going to begin collecting dues. June is the big dues push. So think about signing up again. It would be great to have your support. Support P45 and all the stuff that we do, which is basically for you and the industry. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Belinda Kemp. You may have had the pleasure of seeing her live in person a couple years ago at a previous spring kickoff, and she's going to talk about finding and filtering for Fizz.
Bear with me one moment while I bring up this this presentation. There we go, and we're off. Whoops, we need to go back one. Okay. Thank you very much, Tony. Lovely to be here, sort of, not in person, but you know what I mean, virtually. I do have quite a lot to cover today, and when Tony approached me, Andy approached me, it was to talk about finding and filtration. Now, the thing with sparkling wine is there is so much to cover. And finding alone could be a day's workshop, but I've tried to condense it all. So we'll see. And we're going to have time for questions and answer sessions. So today I'm going to talk to you about press fractioning to reduce fining, only briefly, because the more you do that and the better you do it, you don't have to fine anything. For traditional method sparkling wine, and nor should we. Certainly never find the base wines. So that's why I've started with that as an introduction. Then we're going to talk about finding grape juice, and hopefully I'm going to persuade you not to have to do it. So that's another thing. Then we're going to talk about advantages and disadvantages of the most popular fining agents that are available. Then I'm going to talk about but finding base wines. And again, my question is, well, why do you want to do it? Because we don't want to find base wine. So you can see here that I'm going along the lines of don't fiddle with things, which is a very technical scientific term to say low intervention, I guess, really. And that's going to come up a bit more as we go on in this session. I'm also going to talk about base wine filtration methods. And again, this is not just the methods, but also the amount. So how severe you filter base wines. And then we're going to have time for, as I said, a question and answer session. It's very weird not seeing faces, so bear with me. So I don't suspect, like Ontario, we don't all have sparkling wine presses that run specific programs. And this is kind of a typical sort of program in this slide for a sparkling wine press. You'll see, first of all, the first fraction, the cuvee, at 1.2 bar pressure here. Now, in Ontario, for those people who don't have sparkling wine presses, they just press to 1.2. Well, actually, some of the better producers only press to 1 bar and won't press any further for their first press fraction for their cuvee. And I'm going to explain to you why. When we get to the first tie, the second press fraction, it starts getting lower quality for what we want for sparkling. And then the second tie, again, you'll see in a second, we encourage everybody to sell to a distillery, to be quite honest. It may smell nice, it may look nice, but none of it lasts for long. So this is actually just to show you, as an introduction to fining, that we did a trial with a commercial winery, Trius Winery here, using their press, and we took their cuvee, their tie, and their third press fraction, their second tie. And straight away you can see the color differences, but that doesn't tell the whole story. We ran a lot of chemistry analysis on this, and we also did some economic analysis with some suggestions of what to do with the second and third press fractions, and some ways you can earn extra money financially through different uses of the second two fractions. So the first one is the one that we always want to use, with the highest acidity, the lowest pH, the lightest color, and the highest foam stability, because you're pulling out the grape proteins, which are so important for sustaining foam. And without those, by stripping those out as we get further down those press fractions, and which we can cover again in a moment, we're affecting the sparkling wine foam that's going to end up in the bottle as well. So we really want to use this for sparkling wine. And if you do that, you don't need to fine the juice. You don't need to fine the base wine. When we start getting into the other fractions, like at the higher pressings, at the higher pressure, then we start press fraction 2, you can see it's medium acidity, a lower medium pH. The pH goes up as the acidity goes down on this, and the color starts forming. Now, what we've introduced to if we use that for sparkling wine, what you've straight away introduced is phenolic, so bitterness and astringency. You've got less stability. So there's a whole bunch of things that goes on there. And then number 3, get off and sell to if you're going to push it that hard, sell it to the distillery and don't worry about it, and make some money and work with the quality wine. Now, the other thing, as you can see from this study we did, is that with regards to pressing, the harder you press, the more likely it is that the wine's going to be oxidized or become oxidized. We did this really quickly using an accelerated oxidation method, but this is what your base wine or your sparkling wine is going to look like, or going to be like. It's going to become more oxidized if you use the later fractions, press fractions. So this is a study that our friends in Tasmania did on sparkling wine. As you know, they do a lot of work, and we've been doing some research with them as well. And to show what they want to do, rather than just show the color, they wanted to actually see what compounds were eluting at certain times. So they used an absorbance scan, and it's a really good way just to see what's going on before you do any further research. And you can see the Chardonnay and Pinot Noir Cuvée and Thai there. And straight away you see what this absorbance range is the range of phenolics in there. And straight away you see that the Pinot Noir Thai, which is the second, in this case it was the second pressing, is really high in all those phenolics compared to all the others. And we just don't want that in sparkling. We want to manage them because we don't want bitterness and astringency in sparkling does not go away. And if you start fiddling with fining agents like PV, PP or bentonite or charcoal, then what you're doing is you're stripping and affecting all sorts of other things. And they have different effects further, not just on the phenolic compounds that you're trying to remove, which tends to be the thing that we're trying to remove most. And I don't always understand this why, and I'll explain that, is proteins. And there seems to be this sort of sense that grape proteins, because they cause a haze in still wine, cause a haze in sparkling. And that's not actually necessarily the case. And it's really actually quite tough to get protein haze into in a sparkling wine. I'm going to explain how we do that. But if you're so scared and your intent as a producer to stabilize what you feel is stabilizing the proteins, because you don't actually know what's there, then there are some things we can do. So fining agents, well, there's quite a few animal proteins used as fining agents, but to be quite honest, a lot of people have lost interest in them for obvious reasons. One being vegan or vegetarian, and another because they're not always effective. They have other implications, as you know, with the effect on environment and that sort of thing, and plant and animal life in general. We're seeing a lot more plant proteins coming out. Pea proteins become quite popular here in Niagara. Potato proteins, I'm trying to think of some others. Wheat kind of fell by the wayside as a fining agent, and that was because of wheat allergies, gluten allergies. And then we've got exogenous wine material. This is quite an interesting area that's being exploited more and more. And one of those things is grape seed extract. So using something that it becomes a waste product, I suppose, to extract it and then use it again as a fining agent. So why do we want to fine grape juice for sparkling wine? And you're going to hear me all the way through this going, please don't. But if, again, I was asked to talk about it, so I'm going to give you some information that you can use. So the first thing is clarity, stability, and efficiency. But the important thing is never to treat your sparkling wine, your base wine or your base juice, like you do a still wine. It's not, it's a different style. We wouldn't treat I'm trying to think of ice wine or orange wine or whatever in the same way. And this also goes for sparkling. So first of all, there's no fining agent that can remove 100% of what you're targeting. So that you'll always have some, and it will remove other things that you don't want. And in fact, if you don't take out, for instance, the first one on the list, activated charcoal, that can strip color, particularly from Pinot, but it does end up in lower quality sparkling wine, which is much cheaper. So if if you're going to put money into sparkling wine, you want to make it the best sparkling wine you can possibly be, or maybe you don't, I don't know, but hopefully you do. The other thing with activated charcoal, there's two things. One is there's different types of charcoal now these days that can target different things, or so they say. And that's the other thing that I always keep an eye on, because there is no doubt that these things remove other stuff out of the mixture, out of the juice. Now, activated carbon has to be added and removed quickly, because if you leave it in for too long, you end up exposing the juice. This is at the juice stage we're talking about, to the possibility of rapid oxidation. And it's going to be a while between the juice and the bottling of the base wine, the actual bottling side. So we don't want to give that opportunity to that juice or that base wine to oxidize. So, but charcoal can be useful for things like pesticide removal, if that's ever an issue. I don't know whether it is. I hope it doesn't seem to be a massive issue, but also copper to a certain extent if somebody's organic and sprayed too much copper. PVPP is another one, and it's a synthetic polymer. Nobody likes using that so much these days. And I think one of the things is that it is synthetic. It's fairly nasty stuff. And it does remove or reduce phenolic compounds associated with the browning and sort of the astringency and bitterness in white wine. But there is certainly a move more towards more natural products in winemaking, I think, as we know as a whole. So the other one, bentonite, is quite an interesting one. And people don't take, it's a bit unfair to say this, but certainly I don't think we have enough understanding of which bentonite, how much, and different types of bentonite. So for instance, bentonite can differ from one package from the same producer to another. Plus there's the types of bentonite, sodium and or calcium, mixed together or separate or whatever the case may be. There's other things with bentonite. You add metals to the wine. Do you need to do that? Do you want to do that? It does really well remove proteins. And again, it's come back to this thing about we want grape proteins in our wine. So I'm going to explain that bit in a little bit more in more detail in a moment. But bentonite, we did quite a few studies on this here at CCOVI, well, not in my house, but at CCOVI, with regards to different timings of using bentonite. And of course, it does remove proteins very effectively. But by doing that, we're really affecting the final foam, the amount of wine in the foam. Sorry, the amount of the stability and the constant, synthesis of those bubbles. So that's a big plus. That's a big minus as well, because the issue is we don't want to buy an expensive bottle of sparkling for it to go flat. But it is efficient depending on what you're doing. So we did this trial. A master's student, Esther Onguta, did a trial, and she added no bentonite in the control, which is the yellow bar. Then she added bentonite just in the tirage of bottling. And then the pink one bar is she added bentonite to the juice. And then the last one is putting bentonite in the juice, the green one, into the juice and the bottling. And we did some analysis on the foam, the height of the foam and how quickly the foam disappears and how long it's stable for. And what you can see straight away is the more you add, the more you are affecting the foam. So there you can see from adding it in bottling actually has quite a big effect, even though it's an adjuvant. And I'm going to explain again that the reason for that is because in this trial, we used sodium bentonite, which is a no-no for sparkling. And then you can see by adding it in the juice, we've dropped down as well. But the lowest is when we have it in everything. So take-home message, I guess, first of all, with regards to it, is sodium, don't use sodium bentonite or use it as a 50-50 with calcium bentonite. Secondly, don't over add bentonite and see really the most important thing is why are you adding bentonite to juice or to base wine or to tirage? What are you trying to do? And do you really need to? Because, bottle fermented sparkling wine, traditional method is going to be lying down for a long time. And just because we get yeast proteins that come during the aging, as the yeast fall apart, we need the grape proteins in there, that the ones that normally cause the haze, the TLPs, in still wine are actually really quite beneficial and really useful in sparkling, because they hold the bubbles together. They make the film around the bubbles. There's more information here in a sec. So this is the picture to illustrate that. There's our lovely glass of sparkling rosé. And you can see the CO2 bubbles rising up there and forming. And you can see the nice layer of bubbles on the top with the CO2 in it. But what I really want to draw your attention to is the two arrows up at the top. And you can see that there is a liquid sort of wine film, but there's also in there a double layer of what we call surface active compounds. And these are actually proteins and polysaccharides. So your grape proteins are forming and holding that bubble together to make it last longer. Now, this doesn't happen to the same extent in a carbonated wine, because you have stripped out the grape proteins and you haven't got the second fermentation with the yeast proteins. So holding on to bubbles in carbonated wine is more challenging. So going back to our trial we just did earlier, we did some sensory analysis in the pre-COVID days when we could actually do that. And really by the different timings of bentonite use really affects the flavor. Now you can use that to your benefit or not, but being aware of it is a really, and this is something that, you guys can do in your own wineries for fun or not. It's up to you, but you can see that by not adding bentonite, we're holding on to the acidic citrus flavors from the base wines, which is actually what we want for long-term aging. When we added it to the tirage only, we got actually more autolytic and yeasty and grapefruity characters, which was quite interesting. When we added it to juice and in the tirage of bottling, we got some pineapple, spicy and orange flavors. I don't want that in my traditional method sparkling wine. I'm sure, hopefully you don't either. And then when we just treated the juice only, then we start seeing more vegetal characters coming out, and there's lemon rind, apples and limes and all that sort of stuff. So it has a prolific effect on the sensory character of the wine, not just the foam. So taking you back to what I was saying about sodium and calcium bentonite, proteins in grapes are affected by the variety, the vintage, the maturity, the pH, and how we process it. There are big differences, for instance, between Chardonnay, I'm sure you know this from working with still wines, but between Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc compared to Pinot Noir, for instance. And that has a massive effect on the type of bentonite that you're using. So a sodium bentonite really affects Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc much more than a Pinot Noir, because there's different molecular weight, different types of proteins. And calcium bentonite really affects Pinot Noir more than Chardonnay. So this is really important for sparkling to think about. And what we advocate most is the use of calcium bentonite at the lowest level you possibly can. It produces a more compact yeast lees in the bottle and so it's easier to do things like riddling. Again, this is going on the lowest amount possible, which is something like 0.03, something or 0.3. I mean, it's just tiny. And because of that, calcium bentonite is used as a riddling agent in traditional method sparkling wine. And the same, if you really, really want to add bentonite for whatever reason to your juice, well, firstly, I would say please don't. And then secondly, if you still don't, if you're still going against what I suggest, then calcium bentonite at the lowest amount is preferable. Okay. So there are nowadays international guidelines in some countries with regards to the amount of bentonite you can add. the interchangeable cations you can add, so sodium and calcium. So you might have a limit now in the US with regards to that. I'm not sure, I couldn't find anything, but that doesn't mean there isn't. So I mentioned earlier about using, if you're doing bench trials to see how much calcium to add, which you shouldn't really need to with sparkling, because you only need to go at the lowest level ever. Then you have to use the same package of bentonite, and I'm going to say calcium bentonite, that you're going to actually use in the juice. I think that's all I have on that. I'm going to leave you with one point. I was trying to sort of explain it quickly, but bentonite, although commonly used by winemakers in the production of sparkling wines, it should actually be avoided. And this is because of its concentration of heavy metals that gets actually released over time. So while your wines are on lees, it's the bentonite's releasing metals into your wine. And bentonite can also have a negative effect on foaming, which I mentioned. So it shouldn't really be used as a fining agent. So that's that. Generally speaking, talking to the guys in Champagne at the IOC and places like that, base wine for production of sparkling wine should have no protein haze risk anyway, so bentonite's not required. So it comes back to this thing of not treating your juice and base wine as you do a still white wine. Very different. Some of you might use this. It tends to be larger wineries. Maybe you have a portable one or a mobile one. So I just thought I'd mention this. The gel flotation for must clarification. Of course, this can be used for still and for sparkling wines. It's more for clarification, for settling, than it is for fining, but it does help. And I think you've probably been spoken to about this before, but maybe some mobile lines have this sort of information. Basically, as the bubbles rise through the grape must, I can't see, excuse me, sorry, can't see this. Bear with me. That's better, now I can see. So as the bubbles rise up through the must, and the grape solids, including phenolic compounds prone to oxidation and browning, tend to cling to the bubbles. So it creates a froth that can be removed from the wine or the juice, depending on when you're doing it. It's really more juice to get you. It's expensive kit, and high tonnage winery would be useful. But again, you know, these mobile lines that are happening all over North America with regards to bottling, cross-flow filtration, and these sort of things, you may come in contact with a gel flotation system that they could test for you. So it must be done prior to fermentation. It actually clarifies your wine in about 1.5 hours, which is really jolly useful in a harvest in a big tonnage winery where you don't have to wait for 24 hours, for instance. And it doesn't have any problems with any sort of enzyme additions, charcoals or bentonite. It can be low cost when you compare it to the amount of power being generated from a sustainable point of view. And it's even better if you've got a mobile line. There we go. And of course, it does remove phenolics. So there are bentonite alternatives. Coming back to my sort of hatred for bentonite, really, there are alternatives to bentonite being trialled at the moment. One is an enzyme that breaks down grape proteins, responsible for haze. It's never been tried on sparkling, and again, it goes back to actually we need some grape proteins in there, so we don't want to smash them all to pieces and get rid of them. But there's another one that's really showing a lot of promise, and that's chitosan, which is a polysaccharide that actually comes from sea crustaceans. It's not actually permitted in the USA, which is fabulous. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is seafood allergy. But the thing is, there's other compounds, there's other things. You can get chitosan from other things. One is Aspergillus niger and one is mushrooms. And these two do not have any sort of allergies to them, although actually some people can be allergic to mushrooms. But anyway, the crustacean one, the seafood one, it's not getting an awful lot of traction, but the actual composition, chemical structure from mushrooms and from Aspergillus niger is exactly the same as the animal origin, and it's really showing great promise. It's easy to make. It's not very difficult. So not the animal origin one, but if you ever get your hands on the Aspergillus niger or the mushroom one, it's worth giving it a go. Now, this chitosan is so awesome. It also does things like remove Brett. We're doing some trials this year on using mushroom ones to remove tartrate and tartaric acid and calcium to reduce crystal formation in sparkling wines. We're using it to remove phenolics and a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm trying to think of what else. Smoke taint. Gosh, that's awful. Sorry. My apologies. So chitosan's going to be quite interesting to see. So I'd keep an eye on what's happening that, and just get a small, if you do see it, I recommend getting a small container of it and just being able to test it, do sort of some small winery trials, bench trials yourself. So we're actually working on this sort of fining and mushroom thing. So I was just going to quickly tell you, and then next year when we've got some results, I can send them to Tony or to Andy to send you out the papers if you're interested. One is filtering winery wastewater using mycelium, these composite materials made from mycelium, from mushrooms and sawdust, which again, anybody is going to be able to make. So the view being that, one, that you treat it quickly for reuse in the winery or the vineyard, the water, but secondly, that actually you can just then pop them into the vineyard afterwards. They are reusable, by the way, as well. And they're totally biodegradable. So that's one thing on the wastewater. But we're using the mushroom-derived chitosan as well to remove pesticides and phenolics. And as I said, from still wines, protein haze and metal haze and all sorts of things. So it's going to be quite interesting to see what happens there. Chitosan has been trialed in sparkling wine, but the Spanish have mainly done work. It's a Spanish groups that work on Cava, and they've mainly done their research using the crustacean, the sea chitosan, the sea animals, sea crustaceans it comes from. So they did add it to sparkling wine, and it actually increased the foamability it reduced phenolics, but it also increased the foaming, because it released proteins and amino acids during aging. I don't recommend trialing it at the moment, but what I wanted to show you was what other things are going on to keep an eye on with regards to sparkling wine that are not bentonite charcoal or PVPP. So as I said, yeah, banned in the USA. So before we go on to filtering, why do you want to find sparkling wine, whether that's juice or base wine? So do not treat your sparkling base wine like still wine. There we go. Now, filtration's is a question I get asked actually quite a lot about with regards to sparkling. And firstly, it's like the fining question. Why do you want to strip everything out again? Because that's, you're going to do that. We don't want to we don't have to, we don't need to do that. Temperature is your friend throughout all of this sparkling wine production method. We never go over 15 free total SO2, and we want to do as little fiddling with it as possible. So actually the best sparkling wine is made with as little intervention as possible. So there's all these different filtration methods. The lenticular filter is really the most popular, and it's really taken the place of the diatomaceous earth filter, which has health hazards attached to it. And that's the one I started using when I first got into sparkling, and it's just horrible to make up. Those little diatomaceous earth bits can get stuck in your lungs and cause all sorts of problems. It's not very pleasant and not advisable. So the lenticular filter has really taken over from that. Cross-flow filtration for, again, either mobile lines or for big wineries, only advised to pass through once, never again. And the biggest question is, what amount do you filter at? You know, again, it's not a still wine. So you want to filter, you want a coarse filter. And even if I do mallow or not mallow, and I make sparkling wines every year, and even though it's on a smaller scale, I make many more different types of sparkling wines. Probably, I think one year we did 105. And although they're research wines, I still make them as a actual winery would make them, if you like. It just takes me longer, even though they're smaller amounts. So for us, we use we coarse filter with a sheet and plate filter, and that's sufficient for us. Remember that during aging, and if you've got whatever adjuvant you've got there, there's also the what's it called? Alginine adjuvant. We don't actually even use an adjuvant because all through sparkling wine, I always keep the temperature low. Everything's low and slow. And I never have a problem each year with riddling or with anything. So for me, coarse filtration. Some people do get nervous about malic acid, malolactic fermentation happening in bottle. In which case, if you're really worried about it, and you know every single wine is different, every grape variety is different, every winery is different, then one way to do it is to do mallow and then coarse filter, or your other choice, of course, is to sterile filter if you're not doing mallow. But in the UK for the last 20 years, there's been no sterile filtration and nobody goes through mallow, because you've still got, as long as your pH is really low and your acid is nice and high, then that's it. One of the problems with sparkling wine is people tend to forget just how low we can go with the pH and how high we can go with the acid. So lenticular filtration, there is a video of it, you can see, it's really cool. It does a similar job to diatomaceous earth. It's much easier for people in your winery instead of staff. There's no disposal problems like you do with bentonite disposal and waste. There's no moving parts to the filter. It just needs a centrifuge pump. The discs in between are cellulose. Cellulose comes from plants, so that's happy days. And the discs can be easily stored within the filter from year to year, and then you just maintain them with SO2 and citric acid. So some of you might already have lenticular filters. I'm not sure, or your neighbour might. So again, if you don't want to do mallow, or you do want to do it mallow, there's a couple of things we can do to inhibit it and prevent it. One is if you have really high levels of medium chain fatty acids, and a winery is not actually going to necessarily know that. But if it won't go through malolactic fermentation and you really wanted to, then that's one of the top reasons. People don't often know or realize that, but your nearest winery lab can help you with that. High acidity is lovely. We love acid. The SO2, although low, you still don't want a lot of total SO2 for mallow anyway. And temperature, we love lowering the temperature. If you want to prevent it, lysozyme enzyme is a good way to do it. It comes from eggs, of course, I think. And I'm not sure, it's not always legal in every country. Like we can't use lysozyme here in Canada. And temperature and SO2. So just the take-home message there is sterile filter the base wine if you're not doing a mallow, if you are worried about it. I don't, but what I do doesn't necessarily mean exactly the same as other people do. And I say this because every single wine is different. So just to go back to this whole issue of fining and filtration, one of the things we want to control is oxygen ingress and dissolved oxygen in sparkling. Doesn't matter when you're bottling, it has no impact whether you whether you've got 1 to 5 milligrams per litre or more. For traditional method, we're not worried about it, but just wanted to highlight the amount of oxygen uptake you can get from filtration. And that's actually sort of sits around, in the study from the IOC, it sits around 0.5 to 2 milligrams per litre. We should never have more than 10 milligrams per litre of dissolved oxygen in finished wine. People tend to forget that when they make sparkling, and some don't even measure it. So we need to keep an eye on that. The highest time where you're going to pick up more dissolved oxygen is at disgorging. And there's type of machines and all that sort of thing. But look how much you can pick up from racking, from transporting or having headspace in your wine. If you're transporting it to a winery for bottling, and you've got some headspace in it, then that's also a factor. And cold stabilization picks up some. So that's another thought, and it goes back, and why I'm showing this is it goes back to the point about if you don't have to fiddle with it, if you don't have to fine and strip everything out, then we're going to be holding and reducing the dissolved oxygen intake within your sparkling. Gosh, I'm not sure, I was talking quite a lot. If somebody wants to let me know with a thumbs up if we're okay. Yeah, okay. I think we're okay there. So just to summarize some things, so we have plenty of time to, I suspect you'll have plenty of questions with regards to this, but the most important fact, obviously after the vineyard, which is the most important, is once you get the grapes to the winery, is making sure you fraction and separate and ferment separately the fractions and don't overpress. The second thing is to always do bench trials and experiments yourself. Any of you can add different types of bentonite to a few bottles of sparkling at bottling. You can do a little tasting once you're able to all sort of get together again, and you can see for yourself what effect the different bentonites have on the final wine. And it's quite dramatic with regards to flavor, as I just showed you, and also the foaming. Then there's also this question of filtration, coarse filtration or sterile filtration. Ultimately, these sort of decisions are yours. But again, why are you doing it? What's your reason for doing it? Are you doing mallow? It's so important when it comes to filtration and how much you want to take out. The other thing is the different types of methods really also depend on the severity, costs, economic costs, but you might also have, like I know here in Ontario, we have mobile lines that do cross-flow filtration and do bottling and do disgorging and all sorts of things like that. And I don't know, I think, well, actually, I know one company, Viniserve, I know they go over and cross into the States and they provide all these services. I'm not sure they do it. They've been to Michigan yet. Maybe I could be wrong. So what I want to get across is every stage of production influences the final sparkling wine sensory and the chemical composition. It's not just what yeast you use. It is how much you fine, how much you filter, what you use, how you treat the press fractions. I'm trying to think of all the other stages, how you build up the yeast in the tirage, what yeast you use. And as you saw with regards to oxidation getting in and that sort of thing. So basically, when I do sparkling wine research and when I talk about sparkling wine and when I make it, I break it down by each particular production stage and really look at what will benefit or negatively impact the final wine. You know, I could do a whole day on dosage, but that's for another day. And what sugar you use is another one. In the second fermentation in the tirage, whether it's cane or beet sugar or glucose or dextrose or whatever. So it's a massive topic and absolutely fascinating. But the take-home message is don't treat your sparkling juice or your sparkling wine like you do a still wine. So with that, I'm stuck. I can send this whole presentation through to Tony or to Andy or to Annette, and you're more than welcome to use it or to share it. But I have included all the references that I've used today in it as well. So if there's something of particular interest, you can go and track it down. I try and use everything that is open access as much as I possibly can. So most of these papers are open access, so you should be able to get them free of charge. So I just wanted to thank our OGWRI and the Ontario Centres of Excellence that work with us, and Trius Winery. OGWRI is our Ontario Grape and Wine Research Incorporated, and they fund a lot of the research here in Ontario. So I guess that's it. I'm just having a look. Is that okay with everybody? I think I just went over by about 6 minutes, but I suspect we'll be all right. So, Tony, how can I help? Is that?
Oh, hey, Belinda, that was great. We have about 5-10 minutes left for some questions.
Oh, gosh, sorry.
That's all right. I can answer. I've got a couple questions for you. Kevin is asking, would you not filtrate at all? Or if you're going to coarse filter, what size of micron for you?
Oh, coarse filter, that's a good question. I would never not filter, I'll tell you that, because, but I would only coarse filter. And when I say coarse filter, I mean to 0.8. I prefer not to go. In fact, I've never made a wine a sparkling wine that's been sterile filtered down to 0.45. And you shouldn't go any further there, because filtration also pulls out those grape proteins and has an effect on flammability. So for me, it's 0.8. And again, it's because it's temperature. So much is temperature, waiting, dropping the temperature, waiting for things to settle out, just not rushing it. And you can do so much with dropping the temperature by I'm trying to think of all the other things, disgorging, riddling is all temperature related. For yeast buildup is all temperature related, making sure one matches the tirage temperature matches the wine. So 0.8 for me on coarse filtration. But that's because I've done everything else beforehand. That has kept it all cold and yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I guess everybody who's attending, feel free to answer some questions in the text box, in the chat box. I've got one that, so we have the chitosan that I've been seeing here in the States from Inardis and Scott Labs is mostly marketed as like a bacterial finding.
Yeah.
You guys up in Canada using it more towards some of the other like polysaccharide findings as well, or instead of, or what's your experience with that?
Well, that's an interesting one, because we've got the same stuff from Scott Labs here, and you can get it, but we do have a strange issue whereby it doesn't appear on our food additive list that is permitted, the permitted list. So trying to encourage people to use it is quite challenging, and it's a case of, somebody doesn't want to risk it in case it's not allowed. And yet Scott Labs are working very hard with the Canadian Food Agency to try to get it permitted. So we haven't used it outside of the research lab for me, where I'm using it. I do it more. It hasn't been used by wineries at all from our side at the moment until that's resolved. It's a fascinating compound, and because it's natural and it's so easy to make, it's just adding acetic acid to it and cooking it for a bit. it's got such great promise, and it's so easy to make, as I said, and easy to biodegradable. The one from Scott Labs, though, does tend to sell itself on its ability to, like you said, be antimicrobial and Brett. And I suspect, but I could be wrong, that like any filing agent, it could do more. I just don't have access to that information as to what else it can remove or add to a wine, which is always interesting. So again, it goes back to wineries doing their own bench trial until that data and that information becomes available. I couldn't find anything from Lallemand or from Scott Labs about it. And I talked to Sybil and some of the other people over there. And there didn't seem to be an awful lot of stuff on it. They know it does Brett, but yeah, so I don't know what else.
Okay, cool. So we've had some people wake up and ask some other questions here. So how do these processes differ for Charmat method? Do you have experience with that?
Do you know what? I don't. We do have a major winery here in Ontario that has got about 20 Charmat tanks and tends to do a lot of the Charmat winemaking for wineries. And I'm going from their experience and their knowledge when I say this, that they are really strict when you deliver the base wine for second fermentation, which wineries do. And that is that they have a complete set of chemical analysis and things they want done in the winery. So they want to make sure that the wine is protein stable, that what else is there? I'm trying to think of the whole list of things they do, but basically it tends to be a lot more stripping. But part of me thinks that part of that is because you're providing a service to somebody else, and you want that other winery. You don't want to be blamed if something does happen. So by giving them this list of directions, they're also partly securing themselves, but they're also stripping everything out. There's another question that goes around a lot about Charmat with regards to wines made in Prosecco, and that is whether you freeze the juice. When you have a big harvest, for instance, and in Prosecco this is done, freeze the juice and hold it back until it's a time you want to ferment it, versus freezing the base wine and then waking it up and fermenting it again, and the different flavors and things that brings to it. But outside of the winery here in Ontario that has this set of conditions that winemakers must abide to, you actually don't feel in a position that I can offer that advice, I'm afraid, for Charmat.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I've got two more. So can you briefly talk about isinglass as a finding agent for sparkling? And then one after that.
Well, I don't understand why you would want to use it. I don't know anybody in any country that I'm going to say that, and somebody in Michigan's going to be using, aren't they? That's why the question is being asked. No, Champagne, they don't use it. No one would use it in Champagne. And they don't either from all my time there. And they don't in French Quarter. And I'm trying to think of anywhere. And so my question is kind of bouncing back is, why do you feel the need? It goes back to this question is, what are you actually using it for? So bouncing back the question to the person whoever asked that is, why would you use it in sparkling wine?
Okay. We don't have a response there, but
I didn't mean to. That kind of sounds like I've cut him off or her off, and I certainly didn't mean to. I'm dead set against using it, and I don't understand why you would need to or want to. Comes back to not fiddling with things, I guess.
Yep. Oh, I guess the response is he's read about it being used in Champagne and Krug in particular.
Okay, so Krug is what they. Okay, good thing. What Champagne says and what Champagne does is often two different things. Don't forget that. That's one thing. Bless. In all good. I mean that humorously. Secondly, just because you read about something doesn't mean they do it, and it doesn't mean they do it on every single thing and on every single batch. I've been to Krug, and there wasn't a bag of isinglass anywhere. Not that it's not hidden, things aren't hidden away. And I'm not really helping this person much by saying that. I'm very aware of that. I'm dead set against it. And it's not used in champagne, I can guarantee that. And if you've seen it somewhere that somebody uses it, that's one thing. But it's used nowadays, it might have done in past years, but nowadays the move to reduce and find an alternative to bentonite is so fast, and the only ones that I've seen in juice in Italy, Spain and France is bentonite, PVP and charcoal. Well, not even PVP anymore, bentonite and charcoal. So I'm not very helpful to that person. I don't mean to be flippant, you don't need it.
All right. Okay, so the final question is, Thomas is saying I'll just read it. I'm guessing that you sterile filter your wine that you use for building your culture for tirage. It would seem prudent.
My question there again is why? Why do you need to do that? Why I don't do that either. No, we don't build up the base wine for about 6 months or longer. And the best thing to do during that time is hold it as a cold temperature on yeast lees. Yeast lees are a natural antioxidant and absorb that. So it means you don't have to add so much SO2 or any SO2. And it releases all sorts of lovely things into the wine, and it clarifies it naturally. And so 6 to 8 months on base wine on yeast lees with or without stirring is actually better, with no headspace. And so no, I've never ever sterile filtered the wine that's used in tirage. So no.
I guess his follow-up is like cross-infection. So I guess if you have a colony of bacteria or spoilage in your base wine, that your culture is a great environment to build that and yeast.
Again, it depends what yeast you're using. I've never ever come across that. I think I don't understand. Again, it comes back to how you deal with the juice. Anything we can do with the juice as opposed to the base wine. I've never, and none of our sparkling wine, we have 100 wineries in Ontario that make sparkling wine now. And I can't think of anybody who would sterile filter juice for tirage at all. The thing that's important here, actually, that I probably didn't say, is that you must use the same wine for tirage to build up the yeast that you're bottling. So if you've coarse filtered and everything's fine, then by bottling, but by using the same wine for tirage, then that's okay.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So it looks like we have time for one more question. Came under the radar, but if other people have questions, feel free to ask, and we can reach out to Belinda off of the presentation times, and we can push them out to everybody. So nobody feels robbed, but Patrick wants to know, what is the short answer on differences between types of sugars?
Brilliant. Yeah, I know I do have a tendency to give long answers. Nice one. I would, so the source, so you look at where cane sugar comes from versus beet sugar. So the production methods are different. So the beet sugar, and you have some Michigan beet sugar, I know you do, actually produces much more complex flavors and aromas, whereas the cane sugar tends to give more floral and fruity characters. So that is probably the other thing that the beet sugar gives, for instance, is more Maillard reaction compounds, so more caramel, more toasty over time as you're aging it, with regards to being on either adding it to the dosage or using it in tirage. I was trying to be quick there.
That was great. You did wonderful and enlightening. So I think that's it. No more new questions, and it's 1 o'clock now. So Belinda, thank you so much.
I hope that was useful, and I'll see you later on this afternoon.
That's right. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Belinda. It was a pleasure as always. And as for every time we have you, I always say we'll have you back.
Thanks very much.
Okay, and we'll have you back actually in a couple hours on the producer panel. So we'll see you again soon. Thank you.